Sovereignty wins the Derby, but will he go to the Preakness? A big weekend for Godolphin, and so much more on the Win Play Show. Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to another episode of the Win Play Show, where we cover all of the big topics in horse racing and handicapping for you, the player. Now listen, before we get into this very jam-packed post-Derby, pre-Preakness episode, want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel. We have race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. So like I said, press that like and subscribe button today. Thank you all for subscribing over Derby weekend. We had 600 new subscribers over the weekend, so welcome to all of you. We had a lot of new people sign up for NYRA Bet, so hopefully some of you have made it on here as well. So thank you for all of your support over these last few weeks, and we have a jam-packed schedule of content, obviously, going up through the Preakness, Belmont Stakes at Saratoga, the Saratoga Meet, fall races at Belmont at the Big A, and at Keeneland, and then Breeders' Cup, and then we just start all over again, right, folks? Listen, a lot of great stuff to get to on this episode of the Win Play Show. But I think, listen, let's not bury the lead. Let's start with the Kentucky Derby. Wow, what a race that was. Won by Sovereignty for trainer Bill Mott, jockey Junior Alvarado, and of course the ownership group of Godolphin, who just absolutely cleaned up this weekend in the United States and abroad, winning the 1,000 and 2,000 guineas overseas, as well as winning the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks. Truly worldwide domination. But let's talk specifically about the Derby and some of my thoughts, reactions to this, and then where are we going after the Derby in terms of who's going to be pointing towards the Preakness, who is not, how does that race shape up, what do we think about the Belmont at Saratoga meet and how that might already be shaping up from a probables standpoint, and then also just dissecting so many other huge performances from the weekend at Churchill Downs. Listen, with the Kentucky Derby, one of the things I'll say, a big picture takeaway, was the two best horses ran, and maybe the three best horses ran the three best races in the form of Journalism, Baeza, and Sovereignty. Those were clearly the three best horses in the race. Final Gambit, I thought, ran a really good race, first time on dirt. Owen Almighty ran a huge race for fifth, but we're going to get into that a little bit more in a second. Some horses had tough trips, Burnham Square being one of those. That was a long shot I really liked, and I thought ran pretty well, actually, for sixth, all things considered. But let's not lose sight of the plot. Sovereignty. This was a horse that there was buzz about last year at Saratoga, and I've told this story ad nauseum, so you've probably heard me say it 7 or 8 times. But my colleague Darwin Vizcaya came up to me in the middle of the Saratoga meet and said, there's a horse named Sovereignty for Bill Mott. Junior's been working him in the morning. He says he's the best 2-year-old Mott has, and he's really special. And he finished fourth in debut, but he galloped out really strong, and he finished behind some nice horses, Rookie Card, Tip Top Thomas, Key Waden, etc. Then you look at what he does in his second start, finishing very close to Prater at a mile. They stretch him out, and what does he do? He wins the Street Sense. Looking back, that Street Sense should have told you everything you needed to know about how he was going to run on Saturday. That was 2 turns at Churchill Downs, going a mile of 16th. And what did he do? He absolutely blew out Tiztastic and Sandman, the eventual winners of the Louisiana and Arkansas Derby, respectively. He was so talented, and he managed to get that win off the bench at the Fountain of Youth to start his 2025 campaign, despite the short stretch and despite some pace dynamics working against him. And then the Florida Derby, I think a lot of us kind of thought, well, he doesn't really need it. You know, that's one of the reasons I was on Tapan Street that day. And by the way, how unfortunate of a scratch was that? And hopefully Tapan Street has a full recovery. It sounds like he might be back in the fall, actually, after suffering a little bit of an injury training up for the Kentucky Derby. But obviously finished second in that Florida Derby. But again, the thought was they weren't unloading the tank in that race. They were saving something. They didn't have that horse fully cranked, and they were ready for the Kentucky Derby. And what a great ride by Junior Alvarado. I thought just a brilliant ride. Encountered some difficulty early, kind of getting pinched and clipping heels, but getting the horse settled. And in some ways that almost helped because the field got really strung out. And the fact that Junior was kind of forced to go back, and Sovereignty was always going to be a deep closer, but just to be in the position he was able to make his way all the way over to the rail from the 18 post although he didn't break from post 18, but saddlecloth 18, but still breaking from a far outside post and making his way over, I thought was particularly helpful. And then Junior made a smart move. He had his eye on journalism the whole time. He knew the horse he had to beat, and he kind of preemptively moved Sovereignty up and made sure that when journalism made his move, he was 2 to 3 lengths behind journalism. And that's the difference in the race, in my opinion. Because if you had told me that when they made their respective moves, Sovereignty was 2 to 3 lengths within journalism, I would tell you Sovereignty is going to win 99 times out of 100. The thought I had was journalism is going to be 6 or 7 lengths ahead of Sovereignty when he makes his move. And that I thought was going to be the difference, that journalism might be sitting a little closer and might be able to get the jump on some of those deep closers in a much more significant way than he was. But Sovereignty was always the horse that had the best closing chance. He was the top closer that I had in my top 3. I was not sold on Tistastic or Sandman in particular. Flying Gambit, like I said, ran really well. And that was a horse that I was picking up steam with over the week. Ended up actually on my pick 5 ticket, which I think I had 3 of the top 4 on my pick 5 ticket. So I was pretty well covered. I didn't have Baeza. Baeza we'll get to in a second. But listen, it was an impressive effort from Sovereignty, who just bore down in that stretch, looked journalism in the eye, went right past him, and really won with a lot of style for Godolphin and Bill Mott. Bill Mott, of course, had won the Kentucky Derby before officially with Country House. That came via DQ, a very controversial DQ, the first DQ in the history of the Kentucky Derby, if I'm not mistaken, when maximum security was taken down. And so he kind of backed his way into the winner's circle, and you could tell that really weighed on Bill Mott in terms of this feeling like his true first Kentucky Derby victory. And I certainly could understand those sentiments. But Sovereignty gets the job done for Mott. Another, again, brilliant ride, I thought, from Junior Alvarado, a smart ride. And remember, what is Junior's other career-defining victory? Coming from well off the pace to win the Saudi Cup with Senior Buscador. There are few jockeys stronger pound for pound than Junior Alvarado. He is a strong jockey. There's a very famous clip. You can probably find it circulating somewhere on the internet of him lifting weights in the jocks room and making fun of Florent Giroux for not having muscles in his arms, basically. It's very, very funny. And Junior he is a very strong rider when he wants to finish. I mean, you put him up there with somebody like Luis Saez, Joel Rosario. I mean, that's the sort of level that I think of Junior at in terms of being a really strong closer. Manny Franco's pretty up, is up there as well. But there's some guys who are just really strong closers, and certainly Junior is one of them. Now, what made the race so thrilling was that journalism ran his race. He ran his race. Sovereignty earned a 104 Beyer speed figure. Journalism and Baeza, I think both got, maybe Baeza got a 101. I think journalism got a 102. Well, that's what he ran in the Santa Anita Derby. So, he ran his race. It's not as if journalism came up empty. He ran a big race, and there was a big gap between the top 3 and everybody else. And so those 3 really asserted themselves in terms of journalism and Baeza. And listen, journalism, I thought Rispoli gave a good ride. I was worried about the ride Rispoli would give. I didn't think it was a bad ride. I saw some people be critical of it, but I didn't think it was that bad. And again, I just thought, he encountered some trouble at the break, but by and large kind of got to the spot he wanted to be in, was able to be in the clear. It wasn't as if he was, getting hung up behind horses. It wasn't as if he, got trapped or wasn't able to make his move when he wanted to. He largely got the trip that he wanted and was able to kind of, like I said, start his move when he did. And I didn't think it was a poorly timed move by any stretch. I thought he kind of timed it right. It just so happened I thought Junior and Sovereignty were a lot closer than I think maybe even he expected. And so those Godolphin Blue Silks got across the wire first, but journalism ran a big race. Trainer Michael McCarthy, non-committal at this point at the time of recording this, of whether or not he was going to go to the Preakness. But a lot of times these California horses, the general sense is they go back to California, they skip the Preakness, and they'll come back to New York potentially for the Belmont Stakes. That is what third place finisher Baeza is going to be doing, potentially. John Sheriffs has said, we're skipping the Preakness. We're going to go back. The next target is the Belmont Stakes if everything is okay. But Baeza is a really, what a horse. And just really, really impressive. Obviously, the storyline there was it also eligible, was able to draw into the race because of the scratch of Grande, as well as Rodriguez, and was able to get into the race, and then ran a huge effort in a horse that was making, if I'm not mistaken, only his 5th career start. And Baeza, of course, had that big pedigree lineage, being the half sibling to Mage, the 2023 Kentucky Derby winner, and Dornoch, the 2024 Belmont Stakes winner, out of the, just one of the great broodmares, Puka. And Baeza manages to run up for 3rd and really was coming running at the end, almost nabbed Journalism for 2nd. Actually, Rispoli was kind of letting up a little bit because he knew he was beat for the win. And so he was kind of letting up on Journalism a little bit. And Baeza came up with Flavien Prat aboard, really almost nabbed him for 2nd. And so Flavien Prat, by the way, continues to just be automatic hitting the board at the Kentucky Derby. Part of that is he's on a lot of good horses. The other part is he's a really good rider. But Baeza got the job, really stepped up and showed that he belonged. And I think it also showed the air and thinking for Churchill Downs, that I understand why they might want to punish horses running against smaller fields. But the reality is now you're just punishing California. California is already in a tough spot for racing for a variety of reasons, which we've talked about on this show in some instances. But punishing them more feels punitive in terms of reducing the number of points they get for their prep races because they might not have enough horses in the race for the Churchill Downs standards. And so that is the only reason why Baeza was also eligible. Otherwise, Baeza would have drawn into the main field because he should have earned 50 points, finishing 2nd in the Santa Anita Oaks, or Santa Anita Derby, I should say, just as Grande earned 50 points for finishing 2nd in the Wood Memorial. Just like Flying Mohawk, who finished 18th, earned 50 points for finishing 2nd in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. So Baeza always should have been in the main body of the field and was able to draw in. I was a little cooler, admittedly, on Baeza. Like I said, didn't have this one on my pick 5 ticket. And Baeza was a horse that I thought, something, gosh, Journalism spotted that horse 5 or 6 lengths in the Santa Anita Derby and still managed to track him down and get past him going a shorter distance. And, going 1.25 miles, I just thought, Journalism I thought was better. And so I wasn't as worried about Baeza. I thought, maybe 5th or 6th, that would be a good showing, but really outran that a little bit by finishing 3rd and really driving 3rd, very close up. And I believe had the 2nd fastest closing quarter behind only Sovereignty. So it was really coming at the end. And both Sovereignty and Baeza ran very, very close final quarter fractions. And Journalism ran a very strong final quarter too, along with Flying Gambit. So listen, it was a race defined by pace, as we expected. That's not a shock. The Kentucky Derby is always defined by pace. And even though there weren't a lot of horses that necessarily wanted to go, Rating East Avenue was truly one of those head scratchers, although East Avenue, I think, finished 8th or 9th, somewhere around there. So, perhaps not that much of a head scratcher, but, still, Citizen Bull goes out. First of all, Martin Garcia takes out, pulls a Bayern and just takes out the inside 5 horses, basically, by just breaking out of the gate and then just making a right-hand turn. Now, admittedly, it looked like the rail was not where you wanted to be, so I understand why you would want to keep the horse, off the rail from the 1 hole, breaking out of that gate, but still pretty detrimental, pretty dangerous. But still, Citizen Bull gets out up there in the lead. You have Owen Almighty and you have East Avenue up there, some horses pressing, and they go 46-1 to the opening half. And they go 110-1, I think, to the opening 6 furlongs. And Citizen Bull starts backing up. Nick Juarez's ride on American Promise kind of made me shake my head a little bit. My colleague Kaylee Shapiro was very high on that horse. I was never that high on American Promise. I just did not see what other people saw with that one. I just thought the best horse you beat was Render Judgment. I'm just not really sold on that. And I just didn't see it at all. And he's a beautiful specimen of a horse. I just didn't think he's a need the lead horse, and he's not quick enough to get to the lead. And Juarez kind of made a middle move. And listen, this is an Oaklawn. You can't make middle moves in the Kentucky Derby a lot of times. And so, he kind of made that middle move inside in between horses, and, Citizen Bull faded back. He ultimately started kind of fading back around the turn as well. And the horse that I really, again, Final Gambit, you got to give a lot of credit. First time on dirt, ran a huge race, I thought, and was a horse that Maggie Wolfendale had said started moving better and better over the track, really caught her eye out of those non-dirt horses. And the 5th place finisher, Owen Almighty, I got to issue a little bit of an apology because I was very critical of Owen Almighty's connections. They win the Tampa Bay Derby, and the word is, hey, we're going to the Pat Day Mile. Then the word is, oh, we're going to go to the Bluegrass. We go to the Bluegrass, we finish dead last. Okay, the word is we're going back to the Pat Day Mile. Then, whoops, nope, we changed our mind. We want to go to the Kentucky Derby. Then we draw the number 20 post, and there's words all week that maybe they're going to scratch, maybe they won't. Well, they end up running the race. I didn't think Owen Almighty had any chance at all. And Owen Almighty goes up, tracks the early pace 3 wide, and son of a gun if he doesn't finish up 5th in this race. Now, that said, if you watch the stretch run, just watch Owen Almighty. I believe that 5th place effort is an indictment on 6 through 19 more than anything else, because Owen Almighty takes the bad step at one point and looks like he's about to go down potentially. I mean, he kind of really falls in with his one leg, all right, and really looks like he's about to stumble and is completely leg weary. The jockey at this point is not asking him for anything more. The jockey is just riding him out basically to the wire. And nobody, and I mean nobody, is able to pass Owen Almighty. What the hell is going on? And so, the fact that nobody was able to get past the 5th place finisher, who basically was conceding the position by that point, and it almost, stumbled deep in the stretch, again, I think is more an indictment on some of the other horses. Now, some horses had a tough trip, no two ways about it. Okay. You look at a horse like Burnham Square, got bounced around and got really cut off and kind of pushed back by Admired Daytona. I thought Burnham Square was going to run really well. And I all things considered, he did run pretty well. A lot of people made a big deal about, Sandman's trip. It wasn't great, but it wasn't that bad. That was a horse I was all the way out on, particularly at that price. Are you kidding me? 5-1 on Sandman? No, thank you. And then the horse that I really didn't understand was Luxor Cafe. Now, you're listening to someone who loved Dermasotogake, who loved Forever Young. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I love Japanese racing. And I am a huge proponent of the Japanese and bringing them over for the Kentucky Derby. That said, at no point did I think Luxor Cafe was a legitimate threat to hit the board at all. I certainly not Admired Daytona, who finished last, but I just didn't see it with Luxor Cafe. And while he did get, he kind of had a little bit of some traffic issues. He made a little bit of a run, flattened out, didn't really do much. And the reality is, it's a big difference between running over that sand-based surface in Japan versus running over the muck and the mud in Kentucky and Churchill Downs. Remember, he did all of his preps in Japan. Unlike Forever Young and Dermasotogake, who did their final prep in the UAE Derby, which is a much more North American typical surface. This was his first time doing it. Now, he moved over the surface very well during morning workouts. But as I've warned people again and again, these are the best 3-year-olds in the country. Of course they move well over the track in morning workouts, okay? It is a news story when they don't. So there's a big difference between moving well over the track in morning workouts versus moving well over the track when it's a sloppy sealed track and you're getting mud thrown back in your face from 19 other horses. That's a little bit of a different story. And that was the story and at 8-1, I mean, you've got to be kidding me. At 8-1, there was just absolutely no logic behind that price, in my opinion. I mean, that was insane to think that he had that percentage chance relative to his odds. So I didn't see it. But like I said, I was a little bit wrong about Final Gambit. I was a little bit wrong about Baeza. But I did warm up to Final Gambit quite a bit in the last kind of 24 to 48 hours before the race. Totally wrong about Owen Almighty. But listen, journalism and sovereignty, those were the best too. I mean, I did an exacta box right before they went off, and made a little bit of money, and that's not a bad Kentucky Derby day when you can get the top 2 in the Derby. So it all worked out in the grand scheme of things, and congratulations again to Sovereignty for just what a huge effort that he ran. Now the big question for Sovereignty, is he going to go to the Preakness? And Bill Mott has been very coy about this, very non-committal, and really cool about going to the Preakness. I mean, to the point of him saying, we're going to make a decision in the next week. Okay. I mean, we're not, Sovereignty came out of the race fine, ate up all of his grain, chewing on his hay, walked around Shed Row, had a little bit of a scrape on his leg, but nothing serious, just superficial. And everything was fine with the horse. So he came out of the race clean. But Mott said, we're looking at this horse's career, not just the next 5 weeks. And this was a horse that always had massive expectations. He fulfilled them, obviously, by winning the Kentucky Derby. But again, looking ahead, Mott not particularly committal to the Preakness. That could be really interesting. If he just chooses not to go to the Preakness, you would imagine that he would skip and then go to the Belmont Stakes. That is Bill Mott's backyard, is up in Belmont, in Saratoga, I should say. And the fact that, he could run that horse at 1.25 miles again. Remember, the Belmont Stakes at Saratoga is 1.25 miles, not the traditional 1.5 miles of the Belmont when it was at the old Belmont Park and what it will be at the new Belmont Park when it goes back to 1.5 miles. But like I said, incredible effort from Sovereignty there. And we'll just have to wait and see what the field looks like for the Preakness, because right now it looks like a pretty good field. A horse like Rodriguez might very well be in that field. Good chance that Bob Baffert sends Rodriguez. Bob Baffert's won the Preakness a fair number of times, 8, I believe. You have a horse like Gosker, who won the Lexington for Brendan Walsh. I believe another Godolphin runner. Very, very impressive horse. You have a River Thames for Todd Pletcher, who actually qualified for the Kentucky Derby, but opted to skip it and go and point towards the Preakness instead. McLean's Music, probably not going to get the 1.25 miles, but at a track like Pimlico, you might be able to get 1 mile and 3/16 with a horse like that. So there's some pretty serious horses that are pointing there. And then you add in a bunch of the Derby runners as well. It'll be interesting to see if any of the top 3 run back. I can't imagine Flying Gambit or Final Gambit will. I can't imagine Owen Almighty will, just because of how tired he looked coming down the stretch. Now, a horse like Burnham Square, maybe that might be an interesting horse because it looked maybe had some excuses. Interesting to see if a horse like East Avenue comes out of this race okay. What some of these other runners might want to eventually do. But listen, it was an impressive effort from Sovereignty to get the win in the Kentucky Derby, and we will see what comes next in the Preakness Stakes. But listen, that was not the only big effort over the weekend. There were so many of them. The New York bred, Spirit of St. Louis, winning the Turf Classic. Okay, a great story. A horse that won the Pegasus World Cup Turf Invitational 2 starts back. Then was a little bit disappointing last time out. Came back now with another big Grade 1 win. And this was a horse that was largely competing against New York bred company on the turf for most of his career. And now, suddenly, later in his career as a 6-year-old, starts competing against the best turf horses in the country and is racking up 2 Grade 1 wins. So a huge congratulations to the connections of Spirit of St. Louis. We love seeing the New York breds get the win up here in New York, obviously. But then probably the 2 performances that stand out the most from the Kentucky Derby undercard. We're going to get to the Kentucky Oaks in a second. But the Kentucky Derby undercard was Mindframe winning the Churchill Downs Stakes and Kopion winning the Derby City Distaff. And let's start with Kopion winning the Derby City Distaff. Listen, folks, I said it on Capping the Card. I said it in the live stream. I said it in a couple of other spaces. When Richard Mandela ships out of California, pay attention and bet with both hands, because old man Mandela does not ship out often, all right? And so when he does, he's live. And that's the reality of what you have with this. You have a horse like Go Rocket Ride, I remember a few years ago, would like this. And so you have these horses that are just, when he knows he has a good one, he ships them out. And Kopion ran back to that 110 buyer speed figure, earned a 109, actually, in that Derby City Distaff. Absolutely blew out that field. I thought Hope Road, the second place runner for Bob Baffert, ran a very good race as well. Had a little bit of the jump. And Kopion dealt with all sorts of things, was coming from further back than she normally does. Obviously had to deal with the sloppy conditions, which she had never faced before, and really showed just all the class by getting the win there that day. Ways and Means finished third off the bench. I don't think that's a bad effort at all. The difference was Kopion was just fresher. And that was kind of always the distinction I saw in my eyes, was that Kopion had gotten a race in or two in and was in better just condition, presumably, in race condition, not just workout condition. And ultimately, Ways and Means finishes third. I think Ways and Means is going to have a fantastic 2025 season. Don't get me wrong. But I thought this was the time to play against Ways and Means if you were going to try to beat her. And I think that one of the big takeaways from that was also, Scylla actually ran pretty well for fourth. She didn't have the easiest trip on the inside, just breaking from the number 1 post, ended up running for fourth. I think she's a good filly. I wonder if she's quite good enough to beat Ways and Means eventually. That'll be interesting to see. And then you had Emery finish 5th. if I'm not mistaken. And that horse just, I know she finished fifth, but that horse just runs honest every time. And I think Emery's a classic example of a horse that might not be a grade 1 winner, but is going to win a lot of grade 2s and grade 3s in this division. And just ultra consistent. And it's able to just, it might be grade 1 placed, sort of a thing, but it's probably a cut below or a half cut below where Ways and Means is, where Kopion certainly is, Hope Road, maybe even a horse like Scylla. As for Vava, who was kind of a disappointing effort in that race, listen, she was coming off the bench, so you have to maybe give her some credit there, or cut her some slack there. The other thing about Vava is, I have a feeling we've seen the best of her, and I wonder if her trajectory might start either plateauing or teetering down a little bit, and so that's something to certainly keep in mind moving forward. As for the Churchill Downs Stakes, Mindframe, that first of all, just not Mindframe. What a finish between Mindframe, Nisos, Banishing, and Bookham Dano. Bookham Dano is a tough son of a gun. He's a little horse that just does not quit. And he, was going between horses and everybody's making a run at him and he just keeps running. And a really impressive effort. But Mindframe ultimately gets up in the last jump of the wire to get the win over Banishing and Nisos, who dead heat for second. And then you have Bookham Dano running there for a very close fourth. And basically the four of them in a four-way photo finish, basically. Incredible effort from all included. Mindframe was the horse I was a little skeptical of. I still don't know if 7 furlongs is actually his best distance. I mean, he's run well at every distance between 7 furlongs and 1.25 miles. He's run every distance in between. He's run 7, a mile and a 16th, a mile and an 1/8, and 1.25 miles. He's run every distance. And he runs well at every single distance. I don't know what his best distance is, though. It maybe is a one. I think it's a 1-turn mile, but you never know. He could be better going 1.1 miles. I just don't know. But the fact he came from well off the pace, got the job done, so impressive. I thought Nisos ran huge, coming off that year-plus layoff for Bob Baffert. He didn't get the best start. He didn't really catch a clean break, was behind horses, dealing with the track conditions as well, and still managed to get up for that dead heat in second. Banishing and Jose Ortiz weaving through traffic on the inside, getting up for second as well. It looked like Banishing was going to get the win for a second. And wow, hasn't that horse reversed form for trainer David Jacobson? Whatever he's doing is certainly working compared to when this horse was in the Walsh barn. And he's always been a good horse, Banishing, but Jacobson seems to have found something to kind of move him up from a horse that ran in the high 80s, low 90s to now consistently running triple-digit buyer speed figures, I think the last 5 times out now. So incredible effort from all of them. Like I said, Bookham Dano, what a huge effort there. You know what it's setting up for? A fantastic Met Mile. That's what it's setting up for. I cannot wait to see these horses run in the Met Mile. That's going to be a show. And I can't wait for that one at Saratoga, and going to have some new shooters coming into that race as well. So listen, those were the big things on the Derby Day undercard. But let's talk about the Kentucky Oaks the day before. Good cheer. Wow. You don't need to say much more than that. Good cheer. Went about 5 wide. It dealt with the slop, dealt with a larger field than ever, and ran a race and just pulled away and did it with ease. I mean, she's now continues to be undefeated. I think she's now 7 for 7 and has never been tested. Nobody's gotten close to her. The closest horse to her was a Hava, who was 2.5 lengths behind her, I believe, in the Fairground Oaks. The Fairground Oaks, talk about a key race. I mean, yet another filly comes out of that Fairground Oaks to go on and win the Kentucky Oaks. We saw it a couple of years ago with Pretty Mischievous. It seems to happen almost every single year. In fact, the top 3 finishers in the Oaks, which was, of course, Good Cheer, Drexel Hill, and Bless the Broken, all stabled at Fairgrounds over the winter. Drexel Hill actually came up here and ran in the Busher Invitational and won that and hadn't run since for Whit Beckman. That horse runs huge for second. And then Bless the Broken for Will Walden was down at Fairgrounds for quite a while, ran down there as well, qualified, and ended up, won the Bourbonnette Oaks and then at Turfway Park, but then came there and ran a huge third. And that was the horse that, Kaylee Shapiro and I were kind of really hyping up. We said, if it's sloppy conditions, you got to put Bless the Broken in your verticals. And she ran a big race to get there. Some horses that didn't maybe get the trip that you wanted to see. I'll start with Quiet Side. It wasn't a bad trip necessarily by Jose Ortiz, but She was a little further back than I think she should normally have been. She clearly likes to kind of stalk the pace, and she was sitting fifth. And so she was a little further back. Jose kept her outside, which I think is where she wants to be. But like I said, a little further out, a little further behind than properly preferable, made a little bit of a move and then flattened out in the stretch. The ride that you got to talk about, though, is Simply Joking. This is why I shake my head when I see Florent Geroux on a horse I like. I just, what are you doing? I mean, that's a speed horse that has inside position. What are you doing exactly? You're pulling the horse back. The horse is throwing its head. You have the horse's head sideways practically going into the first turn. Just let the horse run. And what's so frustrating is Geroux is really good on a speed horse. And yet he insists on rating sometimes. And anyway, so that was not good. I didn't think the horse had any chance to win, to be clear. I didn't like Simply Joking at all. But still, you want to see the horse at least be able to put forth its best effort, and it wasn't going to be able to do that rating on the inside. That's for sure. But the horse that really shook things up was Tenma. Tenma Sent, which that seemed pretty obvious once you saw the track condition. She was going to go and be up front. There was no rating with her. And Lacara, you can run 46-2 all day on 4 furlong works. You ain't winning the Kentucky Oaks. And again, this is one much like Sandman and Luxor Cafe. I was wrong about some things. Listen, I played against Good Cheer. She was my second choice. I had Quiet Side up top. So I was wrong about some stuff. I was right about some stuff. Fading Lacara was the one thing I was probably most right about in that race. I didn't have any belief in her at all. And she almost got caught by Take Charge Milady going a shorter distance in the Ashland with no pace pressure. Now you put pace pressure, you put legit pace pressure like Tenma on her, please. She was going to fold every single time and twice on Sunday. Thankfully, the race was ready to run on Friday, so they didn't run it twice. But it was Tenma pressing her. And then Tenma, this is where I was wrong. I was very wrong. My colleague Kaylee Shapiro, she was right. She said Tenma's going to run a big race. She's going to run good. And she did run well. To press that pace, Lacara finished nowhere. Tenma holds on for fourth. She really ran well, all things considered, I thought, for that fourth place finish. So the Oaks, though, congratulations to Godolphin, to Brad Cox Racing, to Luis Saez. Incredible effort from Good Cheer. We just saw a filly last year in Thorpedo Anna put on a show for a 3-year-old campaign. And it certainly feels like Good Cheer is going to put on a show for a 3-year-old campaign as well, because there's nobody right now that looks like she could challenge her outside of maybe her stablemate, Immersive, who is still on the bench, who is the champion 2-year-old filly. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the other big thing that we got to talk about from the two big things that we got to talk about from the Oaks Day undercard, Fierceness and Thorpedo Anna. One I was right, one I was wrong. Let's start where I was wrong. People like to hear when I'm wrong. We'll give one for the people. Fierceness in the Ali Sheba. I was all the way against Fierceness. I thought, it just feels like they're moving this horse maybe a little too soon up to a grade 2. They were supposed to go to the Westchester. Now suddenly we're going to change plans. Poli's running 2 horses against each other in the same race, with Locked being the other. And I didn't love it. I didn't like the speed dynamic. There was speed to his inside and speed to his outside. I don't love it. And Fierceness is a horse that does not like to be inside. That is obvious. But one thing that is also obvious is Johnny Velasquez is in the Hall of Fame. And he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason, because he knows how to ride this horse and many other horses. And indeed, he was not the speed of the speed. And you saw a horse like Hall of Fame, and you saw a horse like Most Wanted really go out there. And what does Johnny V do? He manages to, because he didn't necessarily even have the best break, but he sits behind and then he keeps this horse on the outside. Velasquez, he did it in the Travers as well. He is willing to cede ground into the first turn every single time in order to keep this horse outside in the clear. That is when Fierceness runs its best. He knows that about him. So what does he do? He keeps him outside in the clear. He moves him up around the turn and on the backstretch into that traditional tracking position. And then what does he do? He sets a track record at Churchill Downs for going a mile and a 16th. Are you kidding me? This is not like setting the track record at Aqueduct going 5 furlongs, which is what Mentee did. Because the reality is we don't run many races at 5 furlongs at Aqueduct historically. This isn't like setting a track record at, some funky distance like 6.5 or something like that, or 7.5, or just some, unusual distance, or a mile and 3/8. No, you're setting the record at a mile and a 16th at Churchill Downs. Holy God, he looked good. What an effort from Fierceness, and what a campaign this is going to be as a 4-year-old. He looked a lot better than Sierra Leone did off the bench, I'll tell you that. And so Fierceness, all credit to him. Mike Rapoli, Todd Pletcher, Johnny Velasquez, huge effort there. I was completely wrong about that. One horse that I was a little bit right about in that race was Most Wanted. Most Wanted ran a big race for Brad Cox. Again, another horse, a little bit like Emery, just doesn't run bad races. Most Wanted ran a serious race and would have won that race had anybody other than Fierceness been in it. And so big effort there from Most Wanted. That's a super talented colt that I can't wait to see as well. Locked finishing further back. It probably was obvious that he was going to bounce off that huge Santa Anita handicap effort, running that 109. Also, Locked is a horse that I think just is better going longer. He's going to excel going 1.25 miles. He's a Breeders' Cup Classic type of horse. And I think that's just what you have to probably keep in mind with him. And 1.16 miles probably is a little too short for him. And he also just looked gassed at one point. Like he was just being asked and there wasn't much there. So, he's one that you got to keep an eye on. I'll be interested to see where Pletcher points in for his next start and kind of when his next start is as well. Now, the one race I was right about in a big way was the next one in La Trainee. I was all the way against Thorpedo Anna. If you looked at my pick 5 ticket that I gave out on NYRA bets, I had Raging Sea singled. I just didn't have faith in this was the best field Thorpedo Anna had faced, and she was declining in terms of her speed figures coming into this. And she declined in a big way. She ran a 72. The winning buyer was an 85. Not exactly great for Raging Sea, but Raging Sea gets the job done. My whole logic was Chad's got the front and the back. He's got Randomized to set the pace, and he's got Raging Sea to run on. And I thought Randomized is going to make sure Anna's got to run too fast early, and then Raging Sea is going to blow by everybody late. And that's kind of what happened. Tax ran a huge race, by the way. I did not see that one coming. But Tax ran huge. A lot was like that horse, actually. But just didn't think she was going to run that well in that particular race. But Raging Sea gets the job done, runs only an 85 buyer, but still gets that grade 1 La Trainee to add to her grade 1 personal ensign. Really kind of a similar dynamic. Randomized, of course, wore out Idiomatic in that race, and Raging Sea comes to get her at the end. This one, a little less in doubt. Raging Sea gets the job done. Anna, listen, Kenny said basically everything was fine. She did get bumped pretty hard going into that first turn. I'll certainly give them that. I don't think that cost her the race in any way, but maybe that affected something. Maybe she had a displacement. Maybe something happened. I don't know. But according to McPeak, she came back fine. Now they're giving her an exam, I think on Monday, head to toe, shipping her to Rood and Riddle to take a closer look at her and really make sure she's doing okay. I would imagine it's going to be a minute until we see Thorpedo Anna back on the track. I think a lot of people are going to say the Travers ruined her. I don't know if that's necessarily true. She came back to win 3 grade 1s since then, the Cotillion, the Breeders' Cup Distaff, and the Apple Blossom, and she also won the Aziri. So she won 4 straight races, but there's no doubt she was a little less than in some of those races. Also, I mean, you saw the same thing with Rachel, right? After she won the Woodward, she was never quite the same. That happens to some fillies. It doesn't happen to all of them. Also, she's now competing against better older horses. I think that's just as much of it as anything else. You look at the races she was running against last year, it wasn't the deepest group of 3-year-old fillies going 2 turns on the dirt. And then this year, she comes back into the Aziri and the Apple Blossom, and she beats Free Like a Girl twice. Free Like a Girl's a nice horse, but let's not make her into Idiomatic, okay? And let's not try to make her into something more than what she is. She never won a graded stakes race. She's only won a listed stakes race. And so then you have to look at who she faced. And I'll be honest, one of the things that really, I guess, concerned me about Anna's chances was I was on site for the double dog dare at Keeneland a couple weeks ago when all, Occult and all of these other, fillies that were supposed to be going up against her ran. I wasn't impressed by anybody in that race. So suddenly she's going against Raging Sea and Randomized. I said, these are the 2 best fillies she's run against by far. And unlike in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, when Raging Sea had to stalk her, which is not her game at all, Raging Sea able to sit further back, Randomized softens her up, and it all works out. So listen, that was a thrilling race to watch. We talked to some people who were on site, said it was a little deflating for some of the people on the track. A lot of pink there for Thorpedo Anna. Obviously, a lot of pink there just because of Oaks Day, breast cancer awareness, etc. But still, like I said, one of those performances that you got to pay attention to see where she ends up going next. But listen, it was a jam-packed weekend. It was a record-setting weekend for handle for the Kentucky Derby. I'm glad to say it was a record-setting weekend for handle for us here at NYRA Bet. So thank you for betting on our platform. We appreciate it. We had so many thousands and thousands and thousands of signups, new signups. So thank you for everybody. I think we might have had a record number of signups as well, if I'm not mistaken. So appreciate everybody's support. But listen, we're going to be back throughout the week talking a little bit more about the Preakness, getting ready for looking at some of the contenders for the Preakness, getting you ready for those races, getting ready for a big weekend in New York. We have some nice races. We got the Ruffian. The Man of War is a short field, but you do have Farbridge running in that race. And you got the Peter Pan Stakes. That's a nice field. Let me tell you, you got some nice horses. You got a horse like Vassimo. You got Hill Road. You got a couple of other interesting horses in that race, in my opinion, who could be real players in the Belmont Stakes in a few weeks' time up at Saratoga. So listen, we're still going to get you a lot of content here on the channel, so make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. All right. For Matthew DeSantis, I'm wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.